Your response to the High Court's decision, the ruling?
I welcome it. I think it's a step in the right direction. It remains to be seen now what the government will do and whether or not the process that has been stalled with removals to Rwanda will be restarted. I hope it does. And if it does, I think it will help. It will actually help to send the right message that if you get here illegally across the channel, you won't be able to stay.
Rushanara?
We had a Conservative MP on a select committee point out that the legal routes for those seeking refuge in our country have almost all but diminished. So I think what the government does need to do is do the work that needs to be done to prevent those who are exploiting desperate people seeking refuge, to stop the problem at source, and also make sure there is a proper pathway for people to be able to apply for refugee status through a legal mechanism, particularly women and children. They are the most exploited and vulnerable, and we just don't have a system that's working, and that's what needs to be addressed.
Alp Mehmet, would you want to respond? That was Rushanara Ali, the Labour MP.
Well, most of those coming across the channel are actually male. They are young working age males, so it's not the case that everyone is actually a refugee. And when people talk about this,
that's why the traffickers, with respect, the traffickers need to be
safe and legal
tackled.
routes. Having safe and legal routes, do they really understand what that means? Whether you're going to set up application points around Europe, around France, and if people are going to be able to go to these application points and submit an application, that they'll be overrun within days, frankly. And what happens at the point where they're either refused or indeed their applications are denied? It just doesn't make sense, frankly. This decision today to remove people to Rwanda, where they're going to be helped to set up new lives, I think is the right one and is to be welcomed.
Rushanara?
Well, one thing I would say is that it's really important that we have the partnership with the French government. We make sure that there are appropriate negotiations to prevent people being exploited getting on those boats, because people are dying en route. We saw that
last week, 4 people dead.
And the point is that we've seen with the Ukraine crisis, the government has introduced some mechanisms for appropriate, safe ways for those who
Hong Kong,
need
Ukraine, Afghanistan.
So there are ways in which they can do the right things, and there are lessons to be learnt, and they're choosing not to. So if there is the political will to sort this out, they can, and actually they're not dealing with the fundamentals here, and the trafficking issue cannot be addressed without supporting the NCA, without negotiations with the French to set up a system.
Let me bring in the others.
Prevent people being exploited like that.
Hang on a second. Hang on a second, Alp, and I'll come back to you, Ella, and then I'll come to you.
Alp is right in pointing out the fact that those of us who want to have a more liberal immigration system, of which I am one, have to stop kind of pretending that the only people coming over in small boats are extremely vulnerable women fleeing some kind of persecution. But the solution, doesn't have to be how do you crack down harder. You could actually take a look at, politicians in this country are constantly going on about labour shortages and the need to, fill positions left, right, and centre. And our points-based system, begun under Labour government and expanded under the Conservatives, is incredibly stringent. It's prevents the working class of Europe from entering this country. You have to have a PhD, you have to high-paid job, you have to be, of the kind of European bourgeoisie to be able to get in here. Why not take a chance? Suggest that these young men who are willing to come and try and make a better life for themselves come through safe and legal means, become citizens and contribute to the society in the same way.
I'm going to get you to respond, Laura, but Alp, you were laughing then, or scoffing. I don't quite know which.
Well, the points-based system has had some sort of constraining effect. It hasn't. It's done the opposite, frankly. But going back to working with the French, yes, if only the French were prepared to take people back in the way that
they have stopped about
we
40%.
would like them to.
They have stopped about 40% of the crossings.
No, the other thing is, with regard, sorry to interrupt you, but with regard to the French, they allow 20% of asylum applications 20%. We allow at first instance 75%. The EU generally accepts only 39%, so roughly half the rates that we accept. It's simply wrong that we're not doing our bit. And frankly, 1.1 million people coming here long term with a net migration of over 500,000 is absolutely absurd, and why it has to be controlled. Immigration has to be reduced.
Do you agree with that, Laura? I mean, I'll just show people the headline, perhaps referencing some of the figures Alp was quoting there. The Daily Mail, 1 million migrants a year will soon be the norm after figures showed a rise of 435,000 year on year, according to a think tank. Of the 1.1 million entry clearance grants in the year to June 22, different to net migration, because, of course, that takes in the numbers of people leaving.
I don't know what the empirical basis is for that, so I'm not going to comment on it. But what I will say, with the small boats, they provoked a specific and distinct problem. In 2020, just 2 years ago, 8,000 people made the crossing by small boat. We're now on track for 45,000 people to make that crossing. And
that's since the policy was announced in April, so it hasn't acted as a deterrent, has it?
But the policy hasn't been enacted. No flight has taken off. And if I just can make a couple of points, of those 45,000, 13,000 are Albanian and 11,500 of them are young men. So the possibility, as Ella says, actually, that not every single person is a refugee, or that there should be the possibility of returns to safe countries. There's been a deal announced with Albania, and the High Court today has said that in accordance with human rights principles and the Refugee Convention, Rwanda is also a safe country. And the point of Rwanda...
Why did the government cut the funding of the NCA? These agencies can actually help to prevent people being exploited, people being put on boats that are dangerous and risky and dying while trying to come to the UK. Why are they doing these things? Because if they're serious about tackling this problem at source, then they would do that. And also, you know, since we left the EU, it means that we don't have the arrangements that we had with the French. The Dublin Agreement does need to...
It was never very successful.
But we do need a new arrangement.
Well, let Laura respond, Rishanara, to those comments about Dublin.
So I've done a number of cases in the immigration tribunals on Dublin 3. It was very difficult to remove, and overall we ended up having more people than removing them. It didn't really work for various human rights-related reasons.
Calling the French president a foe by Liz Truss isn't exactly particularly helpful in damaging relations with the French.
I take that point, but I think there has been a new constructive relationship between the Prime Minister and the French President. I think you've seen that in the last few weeks. The Prime Minister did talk about funding for the NCA in his announcement last week, and also safe and legal routes.
That was 12 years after being in government, with respect.
But you say there's no safe and
better late than never.
But you say there's no safe and legal routes. But since March of this year, we've taken 150,000 Ukrainian
that was a Conservative MP.
People.
His words, not mine.
We've taken 100.
Well, don't talk over each other. Go on.
Right, well, I don't want to have a disagreement. But we have, I mean, just one scheme, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, 150,000 people now living safely in the United Kingdom. As I say, I take your point on safe and legal routes.
As an example of where good work can be done.
Alp Mehmet, thank you very much for joining us today on that decision from the High Court.